author of Palestine Laboratory and has spent much time in Israel and the Palestinian territories talking to people and finding out more about that issue. Antony, when we see what's happened now in the last 23 minutes or so, did you think that it was possible that we could see an extension of that truce this morning?
I certainly hope so, but I know that there was massive pressure on the Israeli side, particularly in the Israeli public, actually, to continue the war. Obviously, there are many Israelis who want to get the hostages out. There's no doubt about that. But the pressure on the Israeli government, both from the public but also from within the government, in the last 24 hours, one of the leading coalition members, one of the far-right members, Itamar Ben-Gvir, essentially tweeted, and I'm paraphrasing here, something like, no war, no government. In other words, I will bring down the government if this war does not continue. So within the government itself, Netanyahu was under massive pressure. And alongside that, I don't think this is the reason the war has restarted, but in the last 24 hours, the New York Times has put out a pretty devastating report confirming some reporting that Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, has done, that about a year ago, the Israeli military was made clearly aware of Hamas plans for an attack with amazing amounts of detail. Now, the Israeli military and government ignored that. It shows in depth how they ignored that. So the warning signs were there. Now, that gives you the context and therefore the political pressure Netanyahu would feel to continue the war, because when the war ends, massive pressure then gets put on him. And clearly he's failed abominably in the last 6 weeks, but the years before that as well.
Do you think Netanyahu is still going to survive after this war, though? There are many who are saying that after this, Netanyahu's got to go.
Well, certainly according to Israeli public opinion polls, he's unbelievably unpopular. I mean, obviously there are many Israelis in the past who have supported him, but even those people, according to most polls, do not want him to remain. Now, they may not want him to leave today or tomorrow, but I think you will see growing pressure on him to leave, to be pushed out. Of course, the problem is, which is the important caveat, any likely replacement, Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid, the most likely Israeli replacements, aren't that different. Very similar policy towards the West Bank, very similar policy towards Gaza, no intention to end the occupation. So maybe the rhetoric is a bit different. Maybe there's not so many far-right members in the coalition, but the practical policy in Palestine, at least at the moment, has not and will not change with the change of leader.
Well, even in a post-war Gaza, Antony, there's so many scenarios that could happen. There could be possible Israeli occupation in the north. There is talk of the Palestinian Authority taking over and having more control and more say in Gaza. What do you think some of the possible scenarios could play out here?
Well, certainly the Americans have been pushing the idea of a so-called reformed Palestinian Authority, which is a deeply corrupt and unpopular body. It's really hard to see that happening in any viable way. In the last 24 hours, there was a report in the Wall Street Journal that apparently America and Israel were discussing the possibility of somehow allowing low-level Hamas members to leave Gaza, whatever that practically means. In other words, to make like a Hamas-free Gaza. Again, delusional ideas. How you'd implement that is frankly beyond comprehension. I think many Arab states also probably would like some kind of reformed Palestinian Authority as well. But again, it's a question of legitimacy. I mean, in the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority nominally is in charge, although really it's Israel, they're deeply unpopular. Mahmoud Abbas as the leader is essentially a figurehead. It's a contractor for the occupation. So, I mean, the possibility, yes, is also that Israelis themselves decide to resettle. And in fact, there's a growing movement on the far right within Israel to bring back settlements, which left in 2005. So most of the scenarios at the moment don't actually bring what Palestinians in Gaza need, which is actual self-determination and real freedom. None of the suggestions on the table that I've seen or heard seem to suggest that that's even a possibility, which is just outrageous.
It really is outrageous when you lay out all those scenarios, because since October 7th, the Palestinian cause has been highlighted all over the world. There are people who didn't know how the occupied lands, what was happening there for such a long time. They thought all of this just started from October 7th. And so now we're seeing this growing support around the world for Palestinian self-determination. Does that support actually bolster governments like the United States to possibly change their rhetoric. If we listen to what Antony Blinken had to say yesterday during meetings with Israeli officials, where he said, if you resume fighting, which they have now done, you have to really look at minimizing casualties in Gaza, despite the fact that we're looking at 15,000 people who have been killed.
I mean, Blinken says that while at the same time America is rushing more weapons to Israel. So, as I often say, look at what they do, not at what they say. And of course, many Western countries, Australia, Europe, particularly Germany, have been rushing more weapons to Israel since October 7th. So that pretty much is clear what their agenda is. Look, there's no doubt in the last 6-7 weeks, there's been a huge global explosion of pro-Palestine support, public rallies and solidarity. It's the size of protests as big as the anti-Iraq war rallies in 2002 and 2003 around the world. That's significant. I'm not minimizing any of that. That's yet to be translated into political action in the US. But there's no doubt that Biden, who is facing re-election next year, assuming he's still the candidate, is struggling. I mean, most polls suggest that he may well lose to Trump. And in fact, his blind, uncritical support to Israel in the last 6 weeks has profoundly damaged his support, particularly amongst young Americans. So there's no doubt that part of the American calculation is also domestic. But at the moment, there's really no indication the US seems to be shifting its position. Rhetorically, maybe a little bit, but as I said, practically, they're providing the weapons. They're replenishing weapons that Israel is using. And now that Israel has restarted, I fear that's going to continue. So without some kind of massive international pressure, and again, the only country that can truly, really stop Israel's continued bombardment is America. It's the only one. Even though America is compromised by its only support for Israel, it's the only nation that can really stop it as well. So it's a crazy contradiction.
Crazy contradiction indeed. Antony Loewenstein, always appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much.